University Innovation Alliance.
And I'm Doug Lederman, co-founder of Inside Higher Ed.
Each week we team up both UIA and Inside Higher Ed to have a conversation with a sitting college president or chancellor who we think that you should be learning from. We are trying to elevate voices in the field that we think are advancing work and leadership that is worth following. So we also do it on a Monday and try and keep it as positive as possible. So that's why we call it Start the Week with Wisdom.
The show is sponsored by Mainstay, which is the student engagement and retention platform that it proves its efficacy through peer-reviewed research, which makes it different from a lot of other companies. It's best known probably for its work with Georgia State, where it helped reduce summer melt by 21%. There's another peer-reviewed study that shows how it helped Georgia State retain 1,200 students, more than it would have otherwise. And you can check out research and learn more about Mainstay at mainstay.com.
And also, this show is later broadcast on the Innovating Together podcast, which is sponsored by the Carnegie Corporation of New York. And we are so grateful for their generous sponsorship. But now,
yeah, we're going to welcome Dr. José Luis Cruz Rivera, who is president of Northern Arizona University. Before getting out to NAU a few years ago, he was president of the City University of New York's Lehman College, and he spent some time. He was a provost before that, and also spent a good bit of time overseeing higher ed policy and practice at the Education Trust here in DC. So, welcome, Dr. Cruz Rivera.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
I was sharing earlier that you're kind of infamous in terms of lots of really cool stuff is happening at NAU since you've been there. And you're someone who has come up in the conversation when I'm out nationally talking to folks. So I'm just really excited to meet you. But I would just kick off by saying, how'd you end up getting to be a college president? Like, what's that journey? Is this a big surprise, or can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, it is a big surprise. I have been amazed constantly about how my career has evolved. I am the oldest of four, father of five, grandfather of two. I was born in the island of Puerto Rico, traveled all over the world growing up, and eventually decided I wanted to be an engineer. And when I was about to graduate from my undergraduate, one of my faculty members stopped me in the hallway and said, I heard you're taking a job. And I thought he was going to congratulate me, and he said, no, that's ridiculous. You should go get a doctorate degree and come back to the University of Puerto Rico and be a faculty member. And that was like a life-changing moment, the fact that one of the professors I admired the most thought I could be a faculty member along with him. So I did my PhD at Georgia Tech, went back to Puerto Rico, served as a faculty member, and very early on, I was sort of drafted into the administrative track. A lot of retirements in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. And so the junior faculty had to sort of take turns leading committees, serving as chair, and so forth. And one thing led to another, and was chair, provost at my campus, eventually went to the system office of the University of Puerto Rico as student affairs chief. From there, got connected on the national level with the Education Trust in Washington, D.C., so eventually jumped into that world, and since then it's just been one surprise after the other, from Washington to Southern California as the provost at Cal State Fullerton, president of Lehman College at CUNY. During the pandemic, I was actually in the system office for the City University of New York as the executive vice chancellor and university provost. And 3 years ago, had the great fortune of being given this opportunity of serving Northern Arizona University. I will say that most of those transitions were kind of accidental, somebody reaching out and saying, hey, would you like to do this for a little bit? And me having the backing of my family to say, sure, let's try it out.
That's a fantastic journey. And I love that because I love how unique it is, because it's also charting a path for other people who are thinking about this role. And I feel like we too often see a very narrow, explicit ladder that it's only this track. And I love that kind of just that journey.
Yeah. Are you going to is the cross country element of your travels, is that, is that accidental too, or are you just going to try to ping pong your way through your career?
Well, I'm hoping to stay here at NAU for a while. We are in Flagstaff, Arizona. It's just one of the most beautiful places in the world. We have a great university. And I mentioned earlier, I have 5 kids. So I have kids on the East Coast, on the West Coast, and in Puerto Rico. So got plenty of excuses to move around that don't involve a professional change.
That's great. So transitioning a little bit to like how you lead. What have been the sort of primary influences in developing your leadership style? Are there specific people who have sort of influenced you the most?
So I've had the great opportunity to work with great leaders alongside them and reporting directly to them, and have made a point throughout my life to really observe and learn. I will say that from an academic administration perspective, there's probably 4 people that I credit the most with sort of influencing my own perspectives on leadership. Um, the former system president of the University of Puerto Rico, Antonio Garcia Padilla. From him, I learned sort of the behind the scenes work of a president or a chancellor, the interactions with elected officials, the quiet work with the unions, the off the record and on the record interactions with the media. And that was a very formative part of my experience. I then went to the Education Trust in Washington, D.C., and from Katie Haycock, my God, I learned so much, especially the power of narrative and the importance of ensuring that you are good at not only advocating for the issues you care about, but in constructing the stories that will allow you to move others to think a little differently about issues. From Millie Garcia, who is now the chancellor of the California State University system. I was her provost at Cal State Fullerton when she was president. And from her, I think I learned a lot of things, but in particular, the value of your lived experience and not being afraid to let your lived experience influence or inform the way you lead and the issues you tackle. More sort of a leading from the heart, not only from the head. And more recently, with the great fellow Matos Rodriguez, the chancellor of the City University of New York, we were presidents in CUNY at the same time. He was at Queens College. I was at Lehman College. He was selected as the chancellor for the system, reached out to see if I would join the system, which I readily did. And from him, I think I learned how to stake a position personally within your professional world, and not allow the noise and the vitriol and the context against which you're trying to drive action move you from that position or affect your sanity, right? Fellow is a very calm and deliberative person, and he is in New York City every day doing the good work of the City University of New York. So I would say from those 4, I've learned a lot, and it influences different ways the work I do.
Well, first off, you've had incredible exposure to some pretty strong mentors to learn leadership style. But I loved what you said there about the quiet work, the behind the scenes, it is really that subtle art stuff that you just cannot pick up in a textbook, and you can't get it from watching people on the stage. It's so that's the kind of mentorship that is just incredibly valuable. I wanted to know, it sounds like most of your career is a surprise, but I'm wondering if there's one particular part that was more surprising. And if you look back, you're like, oh, that is the curveball. Because I'm wondering, was IHEP the curveball, or is the presidency itself?
I think I haven't thought about it that way before, but I think, yes, the Education Trust would be the curveball. And there, it's very interesting. I was the Chief Student Affairs Officer for the University of Puerto Rico system, which in itself was a curveball because I was more of an academic affairs type. But I was an engineer, and the system was going through a student information system transition into PeopleSoft. And the president said, hey, the president of the system, would you come to the central office? You learn about student affairs and help us with this important project. But then being in that position, which was a curveball, the Education Trust and the National Association of System Heads launched a project called Access to Success, which was meant to counter some of the recommendations, or not the recommendations, the criticism that came from a Margaret Spelling's report, Education Adrift, I believe the name of the report was. And so these system heads across the country committed to expanding access and improving retention and graduation rates and closing achievement gaps. And the University of Puerto Rico, we accepted being part of that network. It was about 2022 systems. And I raised my hand and I said, I would like to be the liaison for the system because I really wanted to learn more about that work. And did that work as a liaison for the system. And then a couple of years later, Katie Haycock says, hey, why don't you come to DC for a couple of years? You learn about policy and help us out with the practice part of the work. And that's really what I would say is the biggest inflection point, because it's what took me out of my beloved island of Puerto Rico and put me on the national scene here.
Also, sorry for messing up. I have an Ed Trust. I think Will DePilar and also Mamie Voigt. I'm gonna have to send a fruit basket. I can't believe. I was like, my brain just connected. I'm like, I know both organizations so well. How did I? Anyway,
yeah.
So.
Well, Mamie was in my team when I was at the Education Trust, and now, of course, she's the president of IHEB. So,
okay. Well, I'm going to say that's the reason why. I was just inflating it. But thank you so much for that, because I do think that kind of that system work, that that chance to be able to do shuttle diplomacy work is like, it's so, yeah, it really does open incredible doors.
Mm-hmm. This is a quick diversion a little bit, but it's interesting because Ed Trust, like a lot of the DC groups, can be kind of a critic of higher ed as well. Like they work with and they do projects like the one you just described, but they also can put pressure on higher education, kind of like journalists do. Yes. But it is interesting. So like going back and forth. I mean, John King obviously has done the same thing. I think he succeeded Katie, or at least. But anyway, but another Ed Trust more recent leader. So how do you think about that? Like, I don't know, the different perspectives. I mean, did being at Ed Trust sort of alter your perspective on higher education too?
It did. To be frank, when I was the liaison to the University of Puerto Rico for the Ed Trust-led Access to Success initiative, I learned a lot about, I learned a new vocabulary of how to talk about the work that institutions do and the fact that the work that we do actually matters. It's not just about the students' motivation or preparation or how much funding you're getting. Even against whatever the context or backdrop is, there are things that you can do as an institution to deliver on your mission and serve your people better. And so when I was at the Ed Trust for about 3 years, I had the opportunity to be the critic, right? At that point in time, the big topic in Washington was gainful employment and for-profit colleges. And so my team and I, and Mamie was on that team, we did a lot of work sort of surfacing the issues and the concerns that we should all be paying attention to in that sector at that time. But we were also highlighting the work of high-performing institutions, those that seem to be going against the odds. And it's interesting, one of the last reports that we did while I was there in my group highlighted 5 institutions in the country that were doing a particularly incredible job in access, success, and cost and affordability. And one of those was Cal State Fullerton, and the others were in the City University of New York system. And so when it came time to move on, it just so happened coincidentally that there was a provost position at Cal State Fullerton. I said, hey, I think I would like to go there. There's a base to work with and elevate. And so definitely it's easier to criticize than do, but it's important, right? If there's no criticism, you can't get the fuel to launch the initiatives that will make a difference.
But I also think, when I talk to campus leaders and we're reflecting on the public's view of higher education. I do think the fact that you have sat in both seats, that you've held the discomfort of both the critic and the campus leader, that you probably have a more clear-eyed view about kind of how you can put it in context. Because I think if you've only worked at an institution, it can be very like nah is the response to what we're hearing, and they just don't get us, and then repeating the same talking points about how higher ed is the greatest thing, and that we can never admit that maybe some things could actually be better. So I bet that you have a much more balanced view about that. It makes me want to think that you would be an excellent person to consult on professional development strategies to support the pipeline for the presidency, to make sure that they have more of a nuanced view and can go in and out of these different constituencies. So making a note for anyone who's watching, who's working on something like that. So I want to know, you've had this incredible career. I bet that you have lots of thoughts about things that should happen or shouldn't. If there was one change that you could wave a magic wand about higher education nationally, I'm just curious what you'd use that wand on.
Attitude readjustment, making sure that colleges and universities find a way to acknowledge that the difficulties they face will likely always be there. Now that I have 30 years in this business, you will always struggle to tell your story. You will always struggle to get the right amount of funding you need. You will always struggle with oppositional forces from the media, from the public, from elected officials. And that's just the nature of the beast. And so, we have to stop complaining and start doing more and advocating in a way that's a little smarter. Everywhere I've been in my career, I've seen that change is possible for the better, regardless of the context. And I've been in New York City during the pandemic. I've been in California. I've been in Puerto Rico. Now I'm in Arizona. And there's just so much that can be done if we all sort of acknowledged our reality and embrace the fact that it is a privilege to work against such high odds, because when you do make progress, the rewards are invaluable.
I love that. And I feel like we're going to cut that clip and it's going to be on a loop. Motivational speaking. That's really great. Thank you.
What do you tend to think of? What are you most proud of as a leader in your career so far?
Well, I think in a sort of a very high level, leaving every place I've gone a little better. That's been my thing, right? Trying to, if I'm going to do something, do it well, and make sure that you have something to show for that effort and the effort of those around you once it's time to transition to another role or place. But if I really am forced to pick one thing, is the success of my students. I am now old enough that I'm seeing students that I taught 20, 25 years ago in electrical engineering at the University of Puerto Rico holding high-level positions in industry, being elected officials, serving the public in ways that amaze me, and bumping into them sometimes in the airport or getting an unexpected DM via LinkedIn. And so that's what I'm most proud of. In fact, I was reflecting on that not too long ago, and that's why I decided to go back into the classroom. I'm teaching a freshman course in electrical engineering. I have 91 students today. Right after this interview, that's where I'm headed to class. And so I would say that's the biggest, the thing that I'm the most proud of is the impact on individual students.
I love that. And I also love the idea of just leaving people better than you found them and leaving places better than you found them. So I am curious about I just want to wrap with the big questions that we ask everyone, and our audience seems to like, which is, I bet it sounds like you've heard a lot of advice. You learned from a lot of great people, but I'm curious about the advice that someone gave you that for you is more of a touchstone that you revisit time and time again, that was like the most important advice? It could be personal, it could be career, but I'm just curious about the advice that was given to you that was the most powerful.
Well, I know exactly what that advice is. I know when it happened, how it happened, what the look on my face was. It was my wife. We had just started dating. This is about 20 years ago. She's a cultural anthropologist. I'm an electrical engineer. We were both faculty members at the University of Puerto Rico. And this is before we started the move that led us to Washington, D.C. and now to NAU. I was working I prided myself as an engineer in particular of being very data-driven. I make decisions based on data. So I'm a very data-driven leader. And one day I was struggling with a big decision I needed to make for the system of the University of Puerto Rico. And she looked over my shoulder and she said, "Beware the perverse logic of a spreadsheet." And that, I was sort of, what do you mean by that at first? And then it clicked entirely. And it was all about the people, right? The individuals. The way, the qualitative aspects of decision making that up to that point, I did not value as much as I do now. And I would say now that the new way we talk about it is data informed leadership, and that's the way I work. I will say that it's more qualitative data than quantitative data that I lean on as president here at NAU.
That's very smart, because we are often very weak on knowing how to take qualitative data as seriously as we take quantitative, because we think there's just something intoxicating about those spreadsheets, the corners, the boundaries, that it's clean, it's square, there's a rigidity to it. And it is very difficult for us to weigh a number against a story that a student tells us that is disturbing, but we don't know, is it one voice versus this number? And boy, talk about one of the biggest challenges in terms of how we do any redesign or systemic change is dancing with qualitative data. So that was very good advice. We are also curious about the advice that for people who aspire to be college presidents, who aspire to lead, who are earlier in their career or younger, what other advice do you find yourself most often handing out?
Sure. Usually sort of mimicking the way that my career has evolved. Just whatever you're doing, in whatever role, in whatever place in the org chart you may be, do the best job you can, and always be ready to take on challenges that go beyond your job description. And by doing that, you will undoubtedly be noticed, even if you're not looking for another job or another role, and opportunities will come your way. And regardless of whether or not you started thinking that you wanted to be a president, the fact is that your career trajectory will be enriched by doing the best you can and always being eager to learn more about something outside of your comfort zone.
It's pretty good advice. Doug, you want to end the last one?
Sure, yeah. And Bridget has, I don't know if she's actually got a shelf full of these books yet, but we ask everybody if they've got if there's a book, often a leadership book, but not exclusively. But what has a book that has influenced the way you think about leadership? And we've had people talk about novels and things too, but is there a book that has particularly shaped your leadership?
Yes, I would say it's Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin. That's my go-to when things get rough.
And with a particular, I don't know, takeaway or what has made it that?
Yeah, I think it's the being comfortable entertaining diverse perspectives on issues, being comfortable with not necessarily being the smartest guy or the most politically able or the most charismatic in a particular room or situation, and leveraging the learning that you can get from those interactions to be a better leader and make better decisions. And having been in places as disparate as Puerto Rico, New York City, Southern California, now here in Arizona, which the cultures are very different, just social and political and institutional. I've sort of, from that book, it helped crystallize certain behaviors, if you will, or illustrate certain behaviors that I found to be very effective, and actually has given me some peace, right? Because I don't need to be the know-it-all, or I don't need to be the person that that drives the decision, because I'm smarter than that. I listen to others.
Well, President Cruz Rivera, this has been just such a delight. You've lived up to the hype. You have been as cool as people have described, and I'm just so glad that we got a chance to learn from you and to meet you today. And Doug, we are so happy to see you back in action. And for those of you at home, we look forward to talking to you next time. But Doug, anything else you want to share with the audience, or you want to say welcome back and good to see you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm glad to be here. Glad to be healthy. And great to see Dr. Cruz Rivera.
One last plug on advice for leaders. Read The Sandbox from Inside Higher Ed.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's our newsletter for leaders. Yeah. Thank you for that plug.
Sponsored by the Sandbox.
Yeah,
this is great.
All
right,
great to see you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.